This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Moment. Tonight, Toronto Jihad and deadly Jihad denial. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent Jihad in Toronto in Greektown on Danforth Avenue. Faisal Hussein killed 2 people, injured 13 on his jihadist shooting spree. We have 2 murdered girls. 10-year-old Juliana Kozis and 18-year-old Reese Fallon. 2 dead girls at the hands of a jihadist. Ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing new for jihad, because even though, of course, this jihadist tried to kill everybody in his sight, it is no coincidence that the young, innocent children are killed by jihad, because as Anna Geifman has written about in Death Orders, these totalitarian death cults, they aim and target children. They aim and target the innocent. And we have Juliana and Reese that have now been sacrificed on the altar of Islamic jihad. And let me add something here, because we think of these children and where children must come first for us, and where the left is so disgraceful. Because as I'm going to get into this in a minute, this leftist jihad denial that continues and even continues with this jihadist attack, it's enabling these murders. The blood of these poor girls and of all the victims of jihad is on the hands of the left and their jihad denial, because they're enabling all of this to happen. And while we speak about Juliana and Reese, I also want to bring up Aksa Parvez, 16-year-old Muslim girl murdered by her father and her brother in Toronto in 2007 for not wearing the hijab. And the left did a lot to cover up all of that as well. And why I want to bring up Aksa is I want to bring up these girls, Muslim girls, non-Muslim girls, Muslim people, non-Muslim people, all the victims of Islamic law, of Sharia, of jihad. And we have to break through this propaganda that the left constantly engages in, that somehow those of us that want to tell the truth about what Islam has to do with what just happened, that somehow we're anti-Muslim, or we're spreading bigotry or racism or some kind of hate towards Muslim people. This is the biggest lie, because the people who want to tell the truth about this are the people who want to save Muslim people and save non-Muslim people and save Muslim girls and non-Muslim girls and Muslim individuals and non-Muslim individuals. And the people that want to lie and deny what jihad is perpetrating are the ones that enable all of this killing to happen. So we have to break through that leftist propaganda. And this leftist propaganda took effect right away again with what happened in Toronto. The Toronto police, that's in the hands, the leadership in the hands of this leftist mindset, you know, that the Prime Minister Trudeau represents, and we see the CBC and the Toronto Star, they're all in on this. Okay, so the Toronto police right away, they're claiming this isn't terrorism. Let's not jump to conclusions. You know, the CBC and Toronto Star start, you know, their jihad denial right away. Let's not jump to conclusions. This is about guns. This is about guns. You know, it might be about mental illness, you know, climate change. You know, somebody might have been unemployed. All of that. All of those ingredients of jihad denial started right away. And there was a strange silence. It was a very strange silence after this massacre. The police wouldn't release the guy's name. And then all of a sudden, after the eerie silence, the jihad family of this individual, Faisal Hussein, puts out a statement about Faisal. And it says that he's mentally ill. He's been struggling with psychosis and depression his entire life. You know, I don't know, there's something a little bit eerie about this. You've got the silence, then there's this family. Since when does a family get to prepare some kind of a statement and then the name is released? And then, you know, bizarre, but it gets more bizarre. Now, the Toronto Star's not going to tell us this. The CBC's not going to tell us this. But heroes like Ezra Levant at The Rebel, truth teller in Canada, Ezra Levant started digging, telling us the truth. People like Joe Warmington at the Toronto Sun, these guys are doing wonderful, investigative, important, profound, truthful work up there, and they're fighting against this secrecy and this jihad denial, imposed by the left there. And what did we find out? That an individual by the name of Mohammed Hashim was actually the driving force behind this letter. Okay, so he crafted this letter. He helped the family with this. And that this is an individual that's actually also the driving force behind the Muslim Brotherhood-linked National Council of Canadian Muslims. So we have an individual, Mohammed Hashim, who's linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, that's helping this jihad family, the family of this jihadist, who, by the way, was shot and killed by police, so he can't speak for himself anymore. They're all preparing this statement about his mental illness. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. I've known some people in my life that, arguably could be said to be somewhat mentally ill or a lot mentally ill. I don't know. Maybe they're busy with their mental illness in many ways, but it's not grabbing a gun and shooting into restaurants on a street. I wonder if this might have anything to do with Surahs 9:5 and Surahs 9:29, Surah 47:4. I don't know, because the Toronto Star and the CBC will never tell us such a thing. So anyway, so the family comes out with this statement, and then the media all of a sudden starts covering this. CTV, CBC, the Toronto Star. We get this combination of stories about what a really sweet smile Faisal actually had, and that his family are actually the victims. They've been through a lot. And then the media is going on and on about what's really important here, and that's gun control. So we see this jihad denial being forced from on top. But like I said, Ezra Levant at The Rebel TV in Canada, he's asking the right questions. So on his Twitter page, Ezra Levant sent out a tweet, and he said, quote, "I'm curious how the name of the Toronto shooter was withheld for a day, and the moment it was released, a Muslim reporter at the CBC state broadcaster issues an official statement from, quote unquote, the family that he was mentally ill, nothing to do with Islam." Okay, so this is Ezra's tweet, and it's a very good question. It's a very good thing to be wondering, and it's an important thing to be wondering. So very interesting. Come along. Who comes along? The Toronto Star's Jennifer Pagliaro, and she tweets to Ezra on Twitter, "Ezra, this kind of fear-mongering is unacceptable. It is disgusting. It won't be tolerated. You should delete it immediately and apologize." Now, this is really frightening stuff here. Ezra afterwards said, "Sorry, I don't take orders from the Toronto Star." He doesn't work for the Toronto Star. But who is this person? Who's this Jennifer woman at the Toronto Star? The Toronto Star is telling Ezra what kind of questions he's allowed to ask, what kind of questions he's not allowed to ask. He's supposed to delete it. It turns out now that everything that we know, he's right on the money. Bingo. Very important questions. And it turns out they're all very legitimate, and he was right on. Hasn't been any apology from the Toronto Star or from this individual that reprimanded him in such a totalitarian manner on Twitter. But it's very reflective of the left's fear and hysteria and totalitarian disposition, because they're just going crazy. They're trying to implant their jihad denial. And when somebody even dares to have a different thought or wants to pursue the truth in terms of what jihad is, this is the response of the left. So what did we end up finding out? Well, it takes the American media to tell us, because CBS News, for instance, one of the American vehicles that was, telling the Canadians everything and the world everything, which the CBC and Toronto Star wasn't doing. But CBS News reported that investigators in Canada had found out and had indications that Faisal was actually visiting ISIS websites, and that they had reports that he expressed support for ISIS. And then afterwards, ISIS actually comes forward and claims responsibility for Jihad and says that, that Faisal is one of their own. So what happens after that? Now we know that this is ISIS. Now we know this is Islamic Jihad. We know that there's a devout Muslim individual following the Islamic mandates for Jihad. What happens after that? The Toronto police still started saying there wasn't any evidence. And then the leftist mantras continued after that, how they weren't sure. It took the CBC, and Ezra was pointing this out on his Twitter page, it took the CBC quite a long time to even start reporting on the fact that ISIS had claimed responsibility for the attack. But the leftist coverage continues. You know, still the discussion is about gun restrictions and all this stuff, except about what needs to be covered and what the Toronto Sun tells the truth about, what the Rebel TV tells the truth about in Canada, and that is, ultimately, we have to tell the truth. And that is that Islamic Jihad is inspired and sanctioned by Islamic texts. And if we're going to keep denying this, we're going to be enabling jihad to continue, and it's going to be causing more death. And it's very important to bring out how deadly jihad denial is, because this jihadist attack that just happened in Toronto would not have happened if the right people were in power today in Canada and were able to really deal properly with the threat assessment. I'll give you an example of the United States in terms of what Obama and John Brennan and all those characters did. When they got into power, they took out references to Islamic Jihad, to Islam, to Islamic law. They took all references to Islam out of the intelligence agency manuals. So because of that, a threat assessment could not be made. And because a threat assessment could not be made, the right precautions could not be made. And that's why 8-year-old Martin Richard died in the Boston Marathon massacre. And Obama's and Brendan's hands are soaked in blood, the blood of Martin Richard and the other victims that died in the Boston Marathon massacre, because they allowed that, they enabled it to happen by not allowing the United States to take the right precautions. And the same happened again in the San Bernardino massacre, in the Orlando massacre. Look it up. We had Phil Caney on our program. He was working for the Department of Homeland Security. He was running investigations into potential jihadists and into Islamists moving in and out of the United States. The Obama administration shut those investigations down. And Phil Haney explains that if those investigations had not been shut down, that San Bernardino and Orlando massacres would most likely have not have occurred, because the people that perpetrated them would have been stopped in their tracks. Ladies and gentlemen, jihad denial is deadly, and we have to confront the left on the ugliness that it represents in terms of pursuing this. And we just have an example of it, of what they're doing in Canada. The Toronto Star, CBC, what Justin Trudeau represents, they are the ones that are enabling this killing. And the people who want to tell the truth, and we have to stress this again, we are not anti-Muslim. We want to tell the truth about what jihad is, how it is inspired and sanctioned by elements of Islamic law. And if we tell the truth about that, we're going to be able to defend people in our society better. We're going to be able to defend Muslim people better, who are also the victims of jihad and Islamic law. And so, leftist media, you are grotesque, disgusting, and shameful, because you're enabling what just happened in Toronto. I'd like to dedicate this program to Juliana Kozis, the 10-year-old girl, and the 18-year-old girl, Reese Fallon, the two girls that were just murdered in Toronto by this jihadist. Our prayers are with you, and our thoughts are with you. And you're on our minds, and we will never forget you. And we pray that your memory will not be in vain, and that finally we can make the decision that we can use this tragic moment to start securing our lives in the face of the real threat we face. Juliana and Reese, our hearts go out to your memory. We pray for you and to your families. We'll see you on the next Jamie Glazov moment. Good night.